everybody. This is one of our virtual events that we're posting today, and our guest today is Andrew Edwards, who is the designer for the Barber of Seville sets and costumes. And we've asked Andrew to come today to talk to us about his process, about how he goes about it, how he got to where he is today, and what he's up to. So there you go. Welcome, Andrew. It's good to see you.
Hey, everyone. How are you?
Good. Doing well.
Happy to see you all as well. So where should we start?
Let's start with your career path. How did you get to where you are?
I started out about 20 years ago now. I think it's 20 years next year. When I left art college, or when I went to art college, I discovered a career path called theatre design, designing sets and costume. Until that point, I'd always really wanted to paint. I enjoyed the idea of composition, and it just, I really enjoyed figurative painting, which is something which sort of connects with people, which may be something that sort of led into where I've sort of gone with theatre, but I never really understood there was a job out there in the theatre world. And I sort of had a passion sort of for costume and fashion and sculpture, and we do a foundation course over here where you try a little bit of each discipline. I found we did a week's course in theatre design, and that's when I sort of fell in love with it, and then that's when I planned to do my degree. And then during my time at college, I sort of connected with lots of other designers. We sort of have different designers come in to tutor us and talk to us about how the career works and how to come up with ideas and how to develop our own processes. And then after that, I contacted those designers asking for work, really. I mean, you start out as an assistant in this industry while sort of developing your own style and design work and trying to make your own contacts. You try and work for other designers and learn from them and learn other skills. I always think that it's not until you really get your feet out the door into the real world, you know, after that last term at college, that you really learn. You know, it's on the job where we learn from each other. And when I started working for other designers, that's when I sort of started to understand how the industry really works. I met a designer called Tim Hatley, and I worked for him for about 5 years, and then I worked for another designer called Christopher Oram for another 5 years. I was sort of lucky to sort of bed down with people, which sort of gives you sort of try and find people who inspire you and work you feel like you connect with. But I was very fortunate with Tim. I sort of developed from being an assistant onto an associate position. And I was actually very fortunate to come out to the States. We did two shows, I think, in America on Broadway. And then with Christopher, I did a couple out there as well. And it was a great life experience for me to sort of turn up in New York and learn how that business works. And it's, I find it's very different for me, it's very different to the UK process. It was a great life experience to sort of cutting my teeth in the industry. And then I was sat at the back of a theatre in Chicago, and I was chatting to a production manager called Gino Donovan. And he said he was looking for an associate in the UK to bring a show over, bring Death of a Salesman over. And I just was like, I'll do it, you know. And I said to him, I've never done this before. I've never brought a whole show over on my own. He was like, can you do it? And I was like, of course I can do it. And I sort of and he was like, well, get on with it then, you know. And that was sort of it. And from that moment on, I've just kept going. It's sort of, that led to another associate job. And then through that, I met some producers, which led to something else. And I think from that, I then got my first musical in Madrid when I was 26, 27, so a few years back. And then just from there, I've just continued to sort of develop my own career through the contacts I've made and through my work. But you can never really tell which path your journey is going to take you. I know that I graduated from a class of 29, theatre designers. I know some of those are still designing, some of them are still assistants and associates, some of them I think are art directors, and some of them teach, and some of them do something completely different. And you don't know what your path's going to go, and there's no right or wrong way. But I think if you believe in something enough, you just have to sort of just keep going, because it's the one thing no one can prepare you for in this industry is its ups and downs. And I mean, God forbid, I wouldn't want to be an actor. I mean, that must be really hard. But I feel like, but I feel like as a designer, you still go up against other people, and you still have to, you get down to the final two, and that you have that sort of, that journey. And there will be times you're not good enough, but you're always selling yourself a little bit, and you're not really prepared for that. It's sort of, so it's a journey, it's a journey, or a career journey, but also a journey, sort of a journey for yourself, and a self-discovery of what your strengths are and what you bring to the table, and your style as a designer, really. So I think it's that's been me for the last 20 years, if that makes sense.
Just going back to when you were talking about your training, and in the UK, a lot of you work both in sets and in costumes and design that way, whereas I think more in the United States, people tend to specialize in one or the other.
Yeah.
Which do you prefer, and how do you like to work?
Yeah. Well, I think where that comes from in the UK is that over here, when we start out, we work on the Fringe and off West End and regional theatres, and the budgets aren't huge, and the fees, if I'm honest, aren't huge either. And so it's more cost effective in many ways as someone who's trying to pay your bills and stuff, to do both. There is the option to not do the costume, but for me, I also prefer doing it. So I think over here in the UK, that's where it's derived from. Whereas I think in the States, you can get employed as a costume designer and as an equal to the set designer. Whereas over here, it just feels like you need to do two. Really, you can't. I don't think you could survive just as a costume designer in theatre over here. I personally love doing both. I know there are some UK designers who I've chatted with who get put off by doing costume, or could lean heavily on their costume team behind them. But because I wanted to go into fashion as well, I get quite excited by the costume. And as over the years, I've learned more on the job, because I didn't get trained that much in it. But as I've sort of delved into the histories of fashion, and as we've created, I've sort of fallen in love with it more and more. But it's creating that whole world as well, which I just adore. It's sort of, I would always try and pick a job where I can do both. Because as you create your set and your world for your performers, you're thinking about them inhabiting it. And it just, to me, makes sense to have full control of that visual language and that visual narrative as you're designing your production with your director. And I just enjoy the marriage of those two worlds. It's harder, I think, because the bigger the project, the more work it entails. On a small play, it's not that difficult to do, five actors and a set. On an opera, this is, I think we've got 8 principals and a 4 to 16. It's, and then on a musical, it gets even bigger. So when you start getting into costume changes and all of those, those extra things, and I think without a good team behind you, you can't. It's impossible to achieve. You need a good wardrobe team and a good supervisor to sort of help you. Just help the support, but it's. I just find that when you're creating, you want to have that full control. Really, It's the OCD in me.
Well, sort of following up on that, on like creating your own environment where you've not only created the physical space that the talent is going to inhabit, but also the costumes. Talk a little bit then about your relationship with the director. Not only how you work with maybe the same director time and time again so that you like work with them and what their vision typically is, but also your communication with the director and how that relationship informs what you do.
You mean sort of my process from where we start, really?
Yeah, with the director. And,
yeah. I mean, with someone like Stephen Barlow, who is directing Barbara Seville, we've been working together now for 5 or 6 years, and we've definitely developed our narrative and our understanding of what we both like, and also how to, I would say, to push each other and challenge each other. It's a working relationship at the end of the day. But from the first project we did together to this project, there's definitely been a development of the process is the same, but the way we treat each other, I would say, has evolved and become more confident, as it would with any relationship. Mm-hmm. We have a lot more freedom to, we just speak to each other much, I think, a lot clearer and direct than we would have when we first started working together. But with someone like Stephen, or any director, when I start the process with them, we normally have a coffee and we start talking about the piece, whether hopefully we've both read it by then, and we talk about how we've responded to it. Really good to read it before you meet your director. It's okay if they haven't read it, but if you've not read it,
will be times.
But yeah, we usually start with a coffee and a couple of hours where we just talk about what we liked about it and how we responded to it and how it made us feel and what we connected with. And you often focus, it's like sort of like a bit of a jigsaw puzzle in some respects. You sort of might go to one scene and talk about that for 20 minutes and then you have an idea from it, and then you suddenly then talk about another scene in Act 2, and then you start to try and connect the dots and see how you could take one idea and connect it with another idea. And is there a way to take one piece of one room from one area and change it? Will it revolve, or how are we going to get from that location? It's very much a jigsaw. And I think as a set designer, your job, apart from creating the world, is also the transitions of how you move from location to location fluidly and without sort of delaying the story. And that is what you do. And that process with the director to try and figure those out. So we start with a few ideas, and then we go away and we spend a bit of time researching. I'll go back to my studio and I'll collect a load of images or do a few sketches. And then we'll come back together and we'll share those. And I actually sometimes work with directors who bring images. It's becoming more common that directors have their own images and other bits and pieces which add to the sort of collaboration. And together we start to sort of narrow down and thin out those images and those visions and what we respond to, and start to create a world, really. With this one, it was very much, when I read the libretto, and I think that the stage direction is in a white house in the middle of the square, and after listening to the music, it just felt so fun and frothy and delightful. And the idea that Rosina is stuck inside Bartolo's head or Bartolo's world, I just got this idea that why does the townhouse in the centre of the square have to be a house? Why couldn't it be Bartolo? So I sketched out a head and a window as an eye and imagined her inside his world. And that and I took that to Stephen with a big gulp and a big breath going, here's an idea, what do you think? And luckily he loved it. But, and we then developed it further, and then we talked about it spinning round and her being inside a cage, and and then we started to go, well, no, that's great for the exterior. How are we going to do all the interior stuff and add in the doors? But we then said, well, it needs a framing device. So again, that constant back and forth and working through scene by scene and act by act and how they're going to act, the performers are going to come on and off stage. We sort of plan that all out before we get to the rehearsal room as a collaboration with the director and the designer. We work through the whole piece to make sure that it works really, because once it's built, it needs to work. I've learned over the years. But yeah, and through that, and it's just a back and forth really, and it's also about challenging each other, and that's the thing I love about working with Stephen. Is we've continually learned to challenge each other further and further, and this for us was a huge step, I think, in from what we've done before, and then it's sort of the same in the costume world. We talk about a certain look, and with this we we set it in the 18th century in one respect, but as a tribute to Rossini. It's been about 200 years since this was originally done. We've worked our way through different decades and different eras of fashion. So we haven't always, because we've got that wonderful attribute of disguises in this piece, we've decided to sort of just dip in and out with those disguises and the period and the periods it's set in. You know, because sometimes you get this hybrid of periods, which can be, depends when it is, it can be confusing at times, but I just think, for us, it just felt as the disguises were involved that we could sort of mess around with the time periods. And that's sort of how that journey took shape.
Yeah, you talked about your relationship with Stephen. How are your relationships with other directors, and how have those relationships shaped your career path?
I think it's very much about the people you work with, and how that, you're completely right, they do shape your career. There are some, you work with lots of different people and you try and find that person you connect with. I try and find someone I can connect with collaboratively. I've never worked with a director, and to me it feels like an old-fashioned concept, who will walk into the room and say, this is what I want, this is what I'm having. I try and work with people who go, what are we going to create together? And so that's what I'm looking for in a collaborator. But at the end of the day, the system of the industry works on is that the director will always get the gig first. You know, I wish sometimes it was the other way around. That, you know, we joked about it the other day, but you know, I don't think I could turn up in Santa Fe going, I've got an idea for a Rigoletto. I wouldn't mind this guy directing it. It just doesn't quite work that way. So you try and team up with a collaborator, a director, and then you go on a journey with them, hopefully. Hopefully you create productions together which are successful, and then you go up the ladder of venues, or however you want to describe your career path. I mean, you know, you start off with this, in the UK, you'd start off at the smaller regional theatres, and then you work your way into the West End of the National Theatre and the sort of the Royal Court and the Donmar Warehouse and those theatres in the UK. And I've been very fortunate that my career has mainly been international, working in Paris at the Comédie Française, and then with a wonderful director called Lilo Bao. But from working with her there, my work then got seen, and I ended up working at Opera Comique there as well. So you can't tell where it's going to go, but by working with these directors at that level, it will lead on to further work, because someone's going to see it. And hopefully if you've done a good enough job, someone will be impressed by it. But you're constantly searching for that duo, and I've found it with a couple of 2 or 3 directors I currently work with now. I know that they'll call me when the next job comes in, and we have that collaboration. At the same time, I say to them, you know, if you don't want to, don't call, because, you know, it's always good to have a change of scenery just for, you know, one project. Maybe not 2, but just for the one. But it's, you know, we have to learn from each other, and it's also healthy, I think, also to work with other people. But you search for that person, and then it's that journey that you hopefully then build those connections together. I mean, if you look through the archives, you start to see those pairings that always work together. You know, so
I had a question. As the producers sometimes put the teams together, you know,
Mhm.
Has that happened to you, and have you found that in your experience? And
Yes, has that happened to me? I think it has. I can't remember where, but there's definitely, I think it's more that it will be that someone will set something up and we'll have a coffee and see if we connect, rather than it actually just being you are working with this other person. I know it does happen quite a lot, and I think I might be a couple of years off that quite yet. But at the level I am, it's been more that I'll get invited to go and meet the director, and we'll see if we connect, and then see if the work comes from that. Yeah, I think it works more like that. But and then it's a question. It's sort of, as I sort of brushed over, it's about getting on with people, and if you find that spark and that connection, because in theatre we have to spend so much time with each other. I mean, I've never worked in a proper job, so I don't quite know how it works, but it feels that we have these really intense creative collaborations and relationships, and then at the end of it you then spend a week or two stuck in a black box every day for you know morning and night creating. And I think if you need to connect with these people, you need to be someone who's on your wavelength. So I think when you do get interviewed for those jobs, if you don't have that spark and that initial, you know it's not going to work, and actually it's best that you don't work together sometimes. If that makes sense.
no, that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Total sense.
That's super. I can everybody to hear.
Do you find that designing then for different types of performance, say opera versus a musical versus a straight play versus, I don't know, a puppet show, that your process is more or less the same, or do you approach those different things differently as the designer?
Yeah. I think the process is the same generally. But I think the space is what I relate to. As a designer, I think it's really important to respond to an environment and how that environment's going to echo what you're creating on stage. You know, somewhere like Santa Fe is so significant with that view behind and that whole feeling when you walk in that auditorium. At the same time, you can get that from a cross arch, and when you enter spaces, there's a reaction that you get to them. And I think it's not so much about what the project is. For me, it's always about the venue and how that's gonna, because that's where the stage is, and that's where our audience are gonna sit. And it's how we respond to those spaces to create the different projects. In Germany, I do musical. There's a couple. I've done 2 musicals there at this warehouse theatre, and it's a thrust stage. So it's 3 sides, but it's very long, and we sort of created the theatre together. So it's more environmental, and you have to take that into consideration. In the bigger opera houses, you have to take into consideration the scale of things to look proportionally right within the proscenium arch. Within Santa Fe, you have to take in the view at the back and how you're going to deal with the light changing from day to night. And it's all those different aspects that different spaces have, and finding those attributes and then using those to your benefit to design, to then work with the piece, or taking the piece and going, what can I bring out of the piece to work with the space, if that makes sense? Because you could just do the play or do the opera or do the musical and just stick it on any stage. But it's so much more exciting, I think, as a designer, to create a space that responds, or a piece that responds to a space, an environment. But I think the process is more or less the same.
So that's interesting. So then from that, going into these different spaces, can you talk then about being the designer and coming into the world of tech, which is what we are, and how you develop that relationship between the people who are actually actualizing your design and what that relationship and communication is about for you.
Yeah, completely. I think it's fundamental, first of all. And it's also one of the things I love about what we do is the diversity in this job is fantastic. You know, I get all this stuff we have already talked about, which is, you know, my time in the studio, my time creating, time coming up with bonkers ideas. And then I get this wonderful time to work with you guys where I ask you to come help me realize it. But if we don't have a good relationship, I believe, then there's no chance we're going to create something wonderful, because it's all very well with me coming up with an idea, but we've got to realize that it's got to be built and the costumes need to fit the actors. And it's about that dialogue of interpretation. You know, what I sort of got taught at college is, you know, is a model is a starting point, and I believe it's the same with a costume drawing. You know, costume drawing is there's not a ton of, it depends, everybody draws differently. You know, you get some costume drawings which are very clear and every single button, and some which are more expressive. And we were saying the other day, the only way you really understand what's inside my head is when we sit down face to face and you talk through and say, what is that? Is that a pocket, or did your pencil just go adrift for a second? And it's that we have to have that that back and forth and that dialogue to be able to create together. And it's the fun part of what we do. I find, you know, when we look through fabric swatches and, you know, discuss them and go, okay, this is great, and I like this about it, and then you'll challenge me and say, sure, but yeah, that's not going to drape very well. And then I'll go, and then but we'll then come up with another idea, and it's that back and forth that you get that develops and evolves a production. That's the stuff behind the scenes, which I think the audience will never understand. You know, I think they can go on tours and get a glimpse of it, but the amount of work and the amount of thought that goes into every detail on a costume, and the same with the scenery. It's sort of, when we learn from each other, it's sort of those build processes, and, you know, how are we going to I've forgotten how high our head is now, but how are we going to put that on stage, and how is it going to transport, and can it have breaks in it, can it not have breaks in it? And I guess different people are what's the right word, less I can't think of the word, but less compromising. But I think that you have to find a way to compromise to realize what you want, to get your ideas across. And I think, again, that comes through dialogue and it comes through talking. And a lot of what I start off with my model and my costume drawings is then about the interpretation of them and having that dialogue to, you know, I mean, with the paint samples that Mark sent over, you know, they were fantastic. And that's done from the model, which I paint in the studio, and it's 24 times smaller. But then Mark will interpret them in a certain way, and then we then have to discuss and go, well, that's perfect, or that's not quite right, and can it be a bit more of this? And, you know, and I think that also comes with experience. You start to learn there's a language of how to convey your ideas and how to get what you want. And obviously, with your experiences, you must speak the several different languages that designers speak. I hope. But yeah, it's sort of so we have that process, and that then, when we then add the actors onto that, it becomes another experience altogether, because it's another collaborator coming into this world, and they will have feedback, and, you know, from when they walk on a stage for the first time, and they you know, they go up the stairs and they might need an extra handrail, or, you know, we might need to, you know, do something else, or a magnet on the door, or to when we have costume fittings. And it's about making them feel comfortable in what they wear. It's all very well me drawing something, us creating it together and picking the right fabrics, but if they're not comfortable wearing it, then we're not going to have a great show. Because, as I said, that why I would not want to be a performer is that I'm not the one that stands on stage every night and has to be critiqued or impress or perform. And, you know, our job is to make them feel wonderful and empower them to give the best performance for our production. And yeah, I think I can't do that on my own. We have to do that together as a team. And, you know, and that's what I love about what we do. It's sort of, it's working through that preliminary process, then working with the actors, and then sitting back in the theatre. And as the whole piece comes together, we can then note it further. We have that time to then discuss it when all of our pieces have sort of, you know, collided in one big bang on stage, and we sort of then fine tune that to create hopefully something wonderful. You know, it's such a pleasure, you know.
You want to talk about elevations?
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about how you put together a package to best convey your ideas, and that way you get.
Do you mean for when I sort of send it all over?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
like
Well,
a model,
the presentation.
you know, elevations, costume sketches.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the students would be interested in finding out, you know, how you convey your ideas so as to get the best possible outcome.
Sure.
How do
So, go on.
I was just going to say, you know, how do you prepare?
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure everybody must do it slightly differently. For me, and it also can depend from project to project. That's where I would say the process is slightly different. I think with somewhere you can just be aware of different things, but I suppose it's also what you want to put your stamp on. But from a set point of view, we always have a model. I always like to do a model to scale, because I feel like you can't understand a space and your world through doing it all on 3D or computer. I know a lot of people do, but I find that having that tactile model is a really great tool for your relationship with your director, for your relationship with your scenery shop, with your painters, you know, and the cast on the first day of rehearsal. So I think, and as a presentation to producers and heads of department at the theatres you're turning up to, they like to see what they're getting. So a model for me is fundamental. And then with that, we'll do a package of technical drawings, which is a breakdown, I guess, architectural drawings, I guess, might be another good way of putting it. A build, they're not full, but I don't do full build drawings. I know, I'm not sure if it's more an American thing, where some designers have associates that do that, but we do a sort of more design concept drawing to scale of how we see everything being built. So it's size, checking it fits really. It's sort of, again, it's part of what we have to do to make sure it does work, but we hand that over as a starting point for the scenery shops to work from, so they can then do all the framework and the structure that's going to go behind it to make sure that can works. So we have the model, the technical drawings, and then I often try and do a storyboard as well to help convey those, how I would see it lit. Obviously, most lighting designers look at those and just aren't ever impressed by them. But I think they're fundamental to start a dialogue and a language. Again, it's starting a conversation. And then I sometimes have some images, some mood boards and references, just to give people, when I present, an idea of where the ideas have come from, what images have inspired me when I was starting out with this project. And often with a rehearsal room, I like to put those up on the wall. Like for presentations, I might do a small sheet with like a handful of images on. But if we're on a first day of rehearsals, I would rather do like a wall of images, just print it out and then stick them all up there. So when people are, you know, creating this in the rehearsal room, they can get a feel for, you know, and connect with some of the stuff and some of where the ideas have come from inside my head or Stephen's head or whoever I'm working with.
I'm gonna go ahead and share a screen, and
Sure.
I'm gonna show the images that you sent earlier while you keep talking.
Sure. And then with the costume, I think it's always important at that starting point to draw every costume in the show, because, and again, I know that in some plays over here, it just depends what your process is. I mean, some designers like to just do a big mood board of research images and go, this is sort of how I see the character being, especially if they're shopping for it and pulling it off the rails. But I always, again, for my world and the textures of screens, I prefer to have a costume drawing for every character and every costume in the show. So I think it makes things clearer. But again, when presenting, I'll have all of this around, but really the model is the key to everything, and the costume drawings for a presentation, because I feel like if people can see that 3D model, they start to understand your ideas. You know, you can do it all on a 2D screen, but there's nothing. I don't think anything beats a scale model as part to help convey your idea across to a producer or an actor or a director or a team, the team building it and creating it for you. So.
Yeah, that's that one.
Can you see the screen we're sharing?
Yes, I can.
Yes.
So we have that now, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the one before that, Andrew, is this one that we brought in. Now, this is not the real jacket. It's obviously not the right color, but we've been working on the embroidery that came from a real coat, a real 18th century coat that's owned by a museum in Melbourne, Australia.
And this is exactly what I'm talking about. It's sort of working together, because I've drawn this, and when I drew this, the way I draw sometimes is I sometimes grab images off online. So my drawings are a mixture, usually just hand drawings, but sometimes I grab a detail and I've copied and repeated that detail on this coat. And when we were in New York looking for fabrics, we couldn't quite find what we wanted. And in the end, you said, look, why don't we just get it embroidered? I'll contact the museum in Melbourne and see if they'll, send us a great photo. And they did.
And they did. They did real high res, for those of you that don't know, they did high resolution photography of every part of that real coat and sent that to me. And then we played around with it with Andrew, sending photographs back and forth, because this coat actually is a size that fits the actual singer. So we needed to figure out the scale. You were talking about working with the artist. We needed to figure out the scale that was going to work on his body.
Yeah, you've got to get it's about those proportions on a performer, whether they've got long legs or short legs, or long arms or short arms, or they've got a big torso, and how broad they are on the shoulder. So you've got to get it right. It's got to suit them. It's not stick it on them and hope it looks nice.
Yeah, but it's and it's a great thing to see it start to come together, because I think the whole digital revolution has made some of these things that we do easier to accomplish, and in the long run, actually more budget friendly. Yeah,
I think, this will be the first time I've had something sort of printed embroidered or scanned and embroidered. I guess it's a new. I've seen it done on a few things over here, which I've been very impressed by.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just finding the right project to have a go on it with. And I think that's also the other thing is, I don't know where this relates to in our conversations, but often you have ideas, and maybe it's about process and different spaces, but sometimes I have ideas of things I want to do or things I want to try out, but you just don't quite know when you're going to get that chance and that project to really do it on. I'd love to do a really good doublet and hoe leather show where it's all in really traditional black, beautiful leathers and soft leathers, which have all been slashed, and it's, but I've got to wait for that project to come along. You know, it's not going to be happening tomorrow, or it's not going to be happening tomorrow for sure. But it's, you know, but it's when you're creating and you come across a process like this, you suddenly get really, as I get really excited by it. The reason that I have the fetish with the black leather then is I did one doublet hose in a production about 10 years ago, and I loved it so much. I was like, I just want to do a whole Henry V, or, you know, I could just see the feel of it. And it's a bit like this with the embroidery. It's sort of, I'd love to do another period show where we could do more of it. But then it also becomes about budgets, which we haven't sort of spoken about. But, you know, the other bit of our collaboration together, all of our collaborations, is that there are limits. You know, you can't. It's not an endless sea of yeses. It's often I get an endless sea of yeses, but it's because we're also steering each other down, going, right, we know we can have this. We're not going to say no to this, but let's do this instead. And it's sort of, you know, so we all stay upbeat about it, rather, you know, to get and to realize something, because these are big ideas often to fill these spaces, and, you know, the budgets are good sizes and we can work with them, but you can't have everything, you know. It's sort of, you've got to, that's where the compromise comes in as well.
Yeah. Others. And Mark, you can chat with Andrew about the carving that you guys did on the head.
So I'm going to share the plates for the Rossini truck.
Great.
And Mark can talk a little bit with you about the carving, what went into that.
Well, the carpenters did, 90% of the work on that, because they scanned both the model and the little plaster research bust, and then combined those dimensions together. That dimension fit the drafting, and then they took that image and cut it into 2-inch slabs, and then that was all sent off to the foam supplier. And so then they layered that all up. So then basically we just had to connect the dots. There was only a couple places where we actually needed to go in and fill in some sections.
I mean, it's fantastic, isn't it, Mark? You know, I don't know how many years ago that would have been getting big chunks of foam and having to carve it all out piece by piece as a starting point, now that you can go and get this all pre-laser cut. And that was, you know, I don't know if we've got that on one of those research sheets before, or if we can come back to it at some point. This has all been scanned from a small bust of Rossini, and then to be able to scan something which is about the size of your palm, and now reproduce it that high. You know, it's a fantastic technology we now have at our fingertips for creating scenery. You know, and then we can then embellish it by hand. I mean, there's always the debate, is it more wonderful to have, there it is, yeah. So when I found this image, I found the image is actually a link to an eBay site. So I then went and bought, which we then had scanned over here, and then we 3D printed it at 1:24 for the model, and then I worked into it a bit on top of that. But it's a fantastic ability to be able to do that now.
Yes, that process saves so much time.
Yeah. I mean, it would have been. Would you have enjoyed to do the whole thing by hand?
Well, the fun part is when you get down, within a couple inches of what you're doing. So it just gives you that process of having to get rid of all the bulk.
Yeah.
So the card
takes out the labor,
of course,
boring bit out. Yeah. But it's because I was showing a friend of mine's son the other day, and it's amazing when you see those layers. It's a huge jigsaw puzzle that pieces together to make a head. It's so pleasing to see, and I can't wait to come out and see it in person again. I mean, that's sort of the interesting process about working internationally. Is sometimes that you can't always get to where you are, so you have to work more remotely, either because you're busy working on something else, or just because it's not the way the system works. So you have to have a dialogue, which either we do over, like this, a Zoom chat, or we do it by sharing photos and then have a good old-fashioned phone call. But sort of those different processes that you have to work around really when you're working in different countries. So
Would you say that there's a pretty significant difference between working in the States and working in Europe?
you know what, I was thinking about this because we talked about this the other day, and I think the reality is that there's different systems. I think every building has a different system, and it's switching on to those different systems. The reason I hesitate to say yes, there is that because the people we work with are all so talented and passionate about their jobs in theatre and opera. That's a similarity which I don't think makes a difference which country you're in, because it's a people's industry. It's about working and collaborating with different people. So whether I'm working in Paris or Munich or Santa Fe or London, rarely, it's about the people you work with. And so people have different processes, but it's about understanding those processes of those individuals. But everybody cares so much about their craftsmanship. And that's the reality of what we're talking about. So, with you guys being heads of departments of the different areas within the workshops and within the opera house, it's the craftsmanship that goes on behind the stage to realize designs on stage, which is what makes everything happen, which we couldn't do without. And it's one of the things I get buzzed about as well, because we don't have craftsmanship anywhere else in it's sort of good at carpentry and seamstresses, and it's you could say it's dated work, but it's not. It's good trade. It's good. I get passionate about it. Sorry, but it's what's important, I think, to getting the show on. So, but yeah, I think as a fundamental, I would say that there's sort of language barriers and bits and pieces like that, but because everybody cares so much about what they do, we're all pretty much the same,
I wanted to say about your presentation with Stephen was so good. And I want to talk about it because we're all trying to, we want to understand the design, we want to understand the concept. And the presentation and your research also give us a lot of information, because from that we have to take and make a lot of decisions while you're not involved or we haven't been able to talk with you. And it was a great presentation. I wanted to ask you, do you have any advice about presenting to producers and their teams with the director that would be helpful for people to know coming out of school?
Yeah, I think believing in your idea is really important, and researching around your subject. I think if you have conviction in your idea, then it will come across as hopefully as a good idea. But with Stephen and I think what works about when we present together more than anybody else I work with is that we get on and we understand each other as people. So and because we collaborate together, it's never one person's project. And so we have such a good back and forth between each other. It's sort of like a double act, I think, at times, where we spar off each other, and he'll say something and I'll be like, yeah, that's that idea fueled that. And we end up, I think, a lot of the time just sharing most of what we've talked about over the last year of creating it in that 2 hours or 1 hour window, and it's just trying to find and share with you guys the fun things, the excitement that it came from when the idea popped into the head of sticking a huge head in the middle of the stage with a moustache stuck on the front of it. That was such a great idea that we want to share and give that positivity that it's going to be fun to watch. So I think having conviction in your idea, I also think, and believing in it. Yeah, believing in it is really strong, but also when you're presenting with someone is being positive and just honest. It's sort of, I think then it will come through to a producer that they want to invest in it and they want it to happen. But it's interesting because with Santa Fe, we presented it, and when we presented the white card, or was it before that? I think when we first came out, we had a preliminary idea before that, and we discussed it, and we talked to him and got changed from that. The original idea got changed, and I think you've also got to be open to that when producers, who are the people who are employing you at the end of the day, when they do have an idea and a suggestion, it's to take it on board. Your idea is not always the best idea, and that's something I've learned over the years, especially with producers. It's good to involve them because fundamentally they are the people who will re-employ you further down the line. Or you hope they will re-employ you. No, I think with presentations, it's about sharing and being open and sharing everything you've learned to that point. And because whether it be a producer or a head of department that's got to create it, they need to know as much that was inside your head that's come from that journey to this stage. And you need to get as much of that across. So there's no point being a closed door at it and just saying, this is it. It's a head in the middle of the stage. We're doing Barbara Seville. It's got a moustache. You've got to share where those ideas and those journeys have come from and what makes it fun. Because if people get excited by your presentation, they'll get excited by the project. And as I said before, it's we all care about what we do, and we need people to believe in it. And it's also that because at some point you also have to hand your work over. So you want to encourage people to have the same care and pride that you have in your work and the same integrity in it, I think. But that is something that's different from director to director. And some directors I work with like to take the stage and they will do the whole thing, and I don't even present, which is a different process. I prefer to work with people who, we collaborate and we share everything, but it's sometimes just a language barrier. I don't speak very good French.
I didn't think about that. And I also thought that for props, your research really, it helped me choose the oranges.
Yeah, well, it's really important. Yeah, I mean, that's really important as well. It's sort of the research, especially with props, is that you need to do almost a Bible of what you want to be, especially when you can't be in the country and I can't just pop round there, midweek and you've got a load of things together and go, which one is it? I've got to give you a really clear series of images and references so you know what you're looking for, because whether it be a piece of furniture or a piece of fruit, it's, you need that clarity, because otherwise you're spending, again, it comes down to budget, you're spending money on things which we don't need to be spending on, and we could be using that to achieve something else further down the line, when something goes wrong or when the director has a crazy idea in the rehearsal room, and, did it happen?
Where is that? Yeah, that gets back to that relationship with the director.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I know that there is budgets for everything, and sort of there's always a contingency for those ideas. But again, it all helps. It's all a bit of, you've got to work around it all. And you just got to be open to things changing. But the more information you can give people, that more clarity, to convey your idea, it's really important, I think, for me.
I think for a last thing for us to just touch on is what sort of advice you would give to young people who are coming into designer as far as like networking into the system and trying to get into the system for one thing, because as you pointed out, being in a university or college is a very different thing from working in reality and the hardships that do come with that, and just trying to meet people. And we talked earlier about staying in touch with people you've been in school
Yeah.
with.
Yeah, no, that's true as well. I think, well, it's two things, isn't it, really? It's sort of the process of how you, of finding work, and as I sort of brushed on before, it's about making those connections, and I may regret what I'm about to say, but, you know, in the modern world, it's sort of, I get direct messaged by assistants, and I got approached through my website the other day by an assistant in France. It's sort of, you have to reach out, and you've got to be bold. I think, you know, and this, so, you know, don't everybody send me an email, but it's, you've also got to help the people from before. I mean, that's what I think. I think if someone's taken the decency to write you a letter or a message and try and get some work with you, even if you can't, you just, you know, say, well, let's have a coffee, or I haven't got anything right now, but I'll keep you on file, and, you know, or hold on, I don't have anything, but you should contact so-and-so. And that's how I got my break. I met and had a coffee with a designer who came to college and taught me, and he couldn't give me a job because he didn't have anything on, or was already had a team of assistants. And he told me to write to another designer. I wrote to that designer, and I started with him a month later. So it's those connections, but you have to grab them, because, you know, that's what it's about. It's, you know, if someone says, let's have a coffee, then you go and have that coffee, you know. And that's one of the things I love about working in America, is that when you do meet people and connect with people and network with people and say, let's have a coffee or let's have a drink, people mean it, because everybody's trying to help each other out or further their own ambitions. And you're not going to move forward sitting at home trawling Instagram or trawling Twitter. That's not going to move you forward. It's making those connections and then doing something about it, which is going to get you seen. And then once you get seen, you can then hopefully get some work from that. And then I would say, when you're working, I think it's just being open. And one of my rules as an assistant was always, if I didn't understand something, to ask. But never ask twice, if you know what I mean. It's sort of like, I have no issue with someone not understanding what I said or what the process is or what I want done, but I still want it done. So, you know, that's what makes you employable at the end of the day, because at the end of the day, I'm employing my assistant to do a job. So that's one side of it. And I think the other part of the question really is having a support network around you, because that sounds like an easy road, but it's not an easy road. And there's definitely been times where I've had no work and I've not known what to do. And you have to turn to your friends and the people you were at college with, or your support network often, because I find that, and this is what we spoke about the other day, is I think the job we do in theatre is a very unique world. And I think not always everybody else understands that. So I think you can rely on the people you went to college with, who are going through similar experiences, often trying to find work, or may have gone and had a couple of projects, but haven't had work for a couple of months and had to go and pick up some running on a film or whatever it is. You know, it's those journeys which you can support each other through, and I think that's fundamental, because it's a tough long journey to get to where you want to in this industry. And there will be highs and there'll be lows, and there'll be highs and right on the back, and there will be a few lows, and you just can't tell where it's going to go. So you've got to be strong. But I think if you believe in yourself and you believe in where you want to get to, and you have that drive, you can get there. But it's important to have the network around you to sort of to keep you stable as well, because I think it's tough. It's a tough industry, you know.
It is.
But a good one.
It's changing.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for taking time out and being with us. And
My absolute pleasure.
and we look forward to actually
Yeah.
putting this on the stage.
So do I.
We've come a certain distance with it, as you can see.
Yeah, I can't wait to just come out and see it all, because it's not fair that you've all seen it all up close and I've only seen photographs.
Yeah, it's the best thing
That's true.
ever. So,
Charmer.
it was great. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.
Absolute pleasure.